This is Uncollared, off-the-cuff conversations between progressive pastors at the intersection of religion, politics, and culture. I'm Todd Leonard. I'm senior pastor with Glendale City Church. In a moment, I'll be joined by Shane Kinnison, senior pastor at First Baptist Church of Glendale, and by Jonathan Stoner, a chaplain with City of Hope and a postulant to the priesthood of the Episcopal Church. Today we continue a conversation that we started last week about the future of the Christian church on the other side of COVID-19. Our discussion started by looking at data that showed that churches are closing at an accelerating rate. And we asked the question, what can be done to change the trajectory of the church? What can be done to make the church relevant again? Or does the church need to go through a dying process and emerge as something new on the other side? I hope you enjoy the conversation as we continue with part 2.
I believe in my own journey of life and faith that the Spirit is moving and the Spirit is active in all of this pandemic and post-pandemic living that we're experiencing. The question for us is, what do we need to focus on? How do we make ourselves open and receptive and available to what's happening around us and within us, even as our own context is changing in real time right in front of our eyes? This might be an opportunity to delve into a second article for today and to consider the characteristics that we might begin to deem very important in these days to come.
Yeah, I think this article that I looked at by Jim Capaldo, who's with this organization Converge Heartland, he wrote an article with some of his peers entitled "What's Next? Post-Pandemic Church Ministry." And they talked about 11 principles, and I'm not going to go through all 11, but some of the ways that they feel like churches needed to shift to address life post-pandemic, and really not just post-pandemic, but post-Christianity, post-institutional Christianity. What is church? And of course, this, I think, applies in a lot of context to other religious life as well. But since the three of us are all in the Christian context, that's the context we're focusing more specifically on. But they talked about a couple things that I'll bring out is that there just needs to be a lot more agility, flexibility to what we do, and that comes with, again, like your friend Jonathan, starting something new and small allows you to be a lot more adaptable to where the Spirit leads, as opposed to having a monolithic structure that requires all sorts of committees and processes to make any change at all. So where you can free ministry from all the structure that has been put in place over the years in institutionalized context, the more you can align with what the mission of God is doing right now in your local community. Another one is, they said that what COVID has revealed is that you can do a lot of things online, but you can't do fellowship. That there is something about the human, we need each other. And so what we do, there needs to be a high priority on interactive connectivity over content delivery. We can do content delivery online. Or if we do it in a community setting or a gathering, we can do it much more briefly than maybe we've done it in the past, concisely. But that we really emphasize that socialization. And then also the idea of not only thinking about bringing people together for fellowship, but if you're going to bring people together also for mission, for actually building relationships beyond the walls of the church. And so I thought those were 2 or 3 key elements that they brought out, and I don't know how those resonate with where you guys are thinking and what you guys are practicing or finding in your context right now. Well, I know for one thing, Shane, you told me that the way you do worship has changed on the other side of the pandemic.
We have, Todd, and it's not rocket science. We've just made some real adaptations to our formatting, and right now we're in and out of worship in no more than 45 minutes, which includes no more than a 15-minute sermon from me. And you talk about connectivity. As soon as the governor and LA County give us more latitude, which should come this week, we're going to be pouring our time and energy and resources into what happens in that last 15, 20, 25 minutes that people want to hang around. And that's where I think we're going to build some connectivity.
That you're thinking content, brief, and interactive fellowship expanded fits right in with what that article is saying, and I think very much with the direction that the church needs to go.
Well, I had to ask myself a question coming out of COVID. Does the congregation, do people need 15 more minutes of me, or do they need 15 more minutes of each other? Yeah, I started to ask my wife her opinion, but I knew where she would fall. She loves those short sermons.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was talking with my folks in Michigan, and the last church that they attended regularly was a pretty big evangelical megachurch in our back in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the pastors at the church would preach regularly 45 minutes to an hour long sermons. And I just thought, my goodness, who has the time to prepare an hour long sermon? And also, who wants to sit through 45 minutes to an hour? And also, who remembers anything from a 45-minute to an hour long sermon? Maybe they remember one little nugget, but I swear if you ask a lot of those folks a week later, hey, what did the pastor preach about last Sunday? They would not even know the title or the topic or anything. No. And so I think that this idea, Shane, of what you're talking about of a sermon that's like the length of a TED Talk, I think that's the ideal length, really. And I think that in this day and age, when you're competing with, we can watch any movie, it's at our fingertips, entertainment, comedy, like anything we want is at, our computers, our Apple TVs, our iPhones. We can be entertained 24/7. And I don't think that people have the attention spans that they did in the 1800s when they could sit and listen to somebody pontificate for 2 hours in an open field, right. It's just that those days are gone. So I think you're on the right track.
Well, we all have some Oregon roots here today. So I was in worship one Sunday morning and doing the pastoral thing at the door at the conclusion of worship. Elderly gentleman in our church comes up to me and he said, Pastor, I just need to tell you something. Those are always loaded moments. And I said, what's that, brother? He said, I wake up every Sunday morning and the first thing I think is, thank God I get to go hear Dr. Kinnison preach another great sermon. And he said, I come to this church every Sunday, and he said, you preach your socks off, and I am so touched and filled. I'm filled to overflowing. He said, I just want you to know one thing. He said, by the time I get out to my truck, I can't remember a word you've said.
And I think, and that's the thing, is what stays with people so much more is the conversations they had with 3 or 4 people that mean a lot to them following the worship. And that's been the thing that's been remarkable to me. And I'm not worried about sharing this because our podcast is not reaching thousands of people yet. I think we were supposed to make sure we had people pretty much leave the church right after worship was over and not stay around.
Yes.
And there was strong resistance to that happening from the people who were coming, and none of us had the heart to push people out the doors. And we have had people staying and mingling 45 minutes after worship is over. And I know that what that is doing for people is so much more important than the sermon that I preach that they've already forgotten. That them,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, we get done about 12:15. It's lunchtime and people are hungry and they're still staying around talking till almost 1 o'clock. Um, that tells you what they're really hungry for. Our church service historically has been very performance based. It's our church has prided itself on great music and great preaching, um, and and I really think the future of the church, both from what people actually need and the financial realities that are coming down the line, is that it's going to be less and less about the performance and a lot more about planning and strategizing specific times for people to get together to interact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's going to make the church real and vibrant, maybe not larger, but what continues will be vibrant because of the interactive nature of the spirituality that takes place.
Well, formatting is a logistic. But what you're talking about and what we're talking about at this moment goes back to your reference of the article. It's about the flexibility and the agility to become agile, to become an agile church leader, pastor, minister, bishop, whomever, to become an agile church leader and to become an agile church family, church body. And what does that mean for us to have fluidity and flexibility and agility in what we're in not only what we're doing, but what we're philosophizing, what we're holding as core, not only just core beliefs, but core values. And how can those become more adaptive as we go down the road?
And I think, in my experience, I had to do a discernment year I had to do 2 discernment years with the Episcopal Church. One was at my home church of All Saints, and then the other one was at Christ Church out in Ontario. And I mean, I love All Saints and I loved Christ Church. But when I was there as a priest in training, the folks I was ministering to were all 65 and older. And I just kept looking around thinking, I love all you people. And I love being here and doing church together and eating meals together. And it's wonderful. But I kept looking around and thinking, man, if this isn't like a visual of what's actually happening in terms of the church is dying. And in turn, and again, it's like this this reminder every Sunday, if we don't change things, then this generation, from, I guess, the baby boomers, this is going to be the last generation that's really in church every Sunday. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the church needs to evolve and adapt and become something new. But I think in terms of what I see giving people life, in terms of fellow millennials and folks that are younger than us, is it's about gathering around the table. It's about eating food together. And then it's about having some kind of a common purpose or some kind of a common vision. And so I think that what brings people together nowadays in terms of the things that I see that are happening in our city, let's say, is folks going to protests. It's folks going to parades. It's folks going to participate in the life of the city, and folks who are looking to make a difference and actually trying to make the world a better place. And actually, I think folks are hungry to actually live out Matthew 25 and to live out that, doing unto others as I have done to you, that whole idea of giving people tending to their physical needs. Is it clothes? Is it shelter? Is it, is it water? Is it, is it visiting folks who are incarcerated? It's about looking out for those among us who are marginalized, who are, it's really expending ourselves instead of like focusing on this gathering together as a bunch of well-dressed, upper middle class, people who are, doing well in society. It's more like saying, hey, let's get together and see how we can help our neighbors. How can we help people who are suffering? How can we help people who are struggling? How can we help people who are sick or people who are in prison? And I think that's really where I see a lot of energy and passion in terms of my millennial friends. And so I think if the church could figure out a way just to pour our resources into supporting that kind of work in our communities, I think we could actually see some really thriving faith communities that might not necessarily be built around a Sunday morning service.
I will say this is that my church skews very old my church has our worship service on Saturdays, and on Saturdays our church service is very elderly. But when our church is doing community ministry, my church gets younger. The people who show up for serving food to people who need food, and the people who show up for peace walks or protest march, or the church, or show up to work with other nonprofit organizations for doing good in the community, my church gets younger. And I think redefining what going to church is, I think, is really important. And to say that serving a meal is going to church. Just because you didn't hear a sermon doesn't mean you didn't go to church. And I think we have to redefine the whole idea of what participating in church life is, because I've got a whole bunch of younger people who are involved in my church who rarely ever show up on a Saturday morning to hear me preach. And I tell them my sermons are fantastic, but they still don't come. And because they care more about seeing the gospel at work than they do about hearing it talked about. And Jonathan, I think you hit on a core foundational principle about what the future is. And like you had said at the beginning, I think we can be a lot more honest about the core of the gospel, because I think when we had these larger institutional churches, you had to be more careful. You had to finesse things in order not to step on toes. Maybe soft pedal some of the harsher things that Jesus says and teaches, soft pedal some of those Hebrew prophet sayings, to not ruffle feathers of one political party or the other. And I think, the reality is this more the future of a mission driven, out in the world, making the world a better place, creating what Christ called the kingdom of God. You're more honest, you're more direct, and you won't get a certain type of person maybe joining your congregation because of that. But the people you'll have are very engaged, and they may not show up to do the liturgy every Sunday, but when you're there to help people, when you're there to fight for what's right, they're right there with you.
First of all, your insights I think, are spot on. Nothing happens in a vacuum. We know that. Everything happens as a matter of context. And again, back to this idea of losing and letting go and finding new life. In that process, that contextual process where nothing happens in a vacuum or nothing happens truly independently of itself, there is this liminal space that we all know about. There's this neutral zone and this liminal space where we have one foot on one side of a threshold and we have the other foot perhaps up in the air, ready to cross the threshold into some new reality, but we're not quite there yet. And so I think that is the context in which we're finding ourselves, both pre and now post-COVID, is we're moving into an arena, we're moving into a doorway, we're moving into an avenue that we've never been in before. And it's not happening out of nowhere. It's happening out of great historic context. It's happening out of long and deep spiritual process led by the Spirit of the Lord. And I encourage us to continue to hold to this reality that we're in this liminal space. Now, while we're in this liminal space, we're still learning how to let go. We're still learning how to lose. And the more we can consciously, deliberately, intentionally let go and lose that which is around us, the more we're going to be actually set for whatever the future is going to be as we cross through this liminal space into this new reality, into this new avenue. And this is an exciting place. It is filled with fear and hesitation. It's filled with doubt. It's filled with unease. My gut churns all the time around this.
Yeah.
But deeper than my emotions, there is within me a very real sense of anticipation and expectancy, sort of that holy expectancy of something is on the horizon that will be for all of us that none of us can comprehend at this time and none of us can control either.
Yeah, I think what gets me excited and also it's kind of scary too, because when I look at the people who are showing up to not just to church, but people who are showing up to be a part of actions that are going to change our world for the better. It's a lot of people who don't look like me, who don't look like anybody on this podcast. It's not a lot of white straight men who are showing up to when you want to see like what's changing in our society and in terms of like what's happening in terms of community development, in terms of social action, in terms of social justice. It's a lot of women. It's a lot of people of color. It's a lot of LGBT folks. And I think that what I'm thinking is like, okay, how do I get out of the way? And how do I lift up? How do I amplify? How do I elevate? How do I serve the people that I think God is raising up in this time, who don't come from where I come from, but who I can look at their lives and their ministries that are not traditional ministries, but they are ministries, and support them and serve and almost like say, hey, I don't need to lead this thing. You need to lead this thing. And I want to support you in terms of like what God is calling you to do in your generation and in this city and in this world.
Jonathan, what you're saying bears weight. It's a vision. It's sort of that liminal space dreaming that gets us ready for whatever the future is becoming already. And there's great significance in that. I think that along with what you're saying is also the reality that all of our clergy peers are feeling, and that is survival mode, the fight or flight syndrome, the height of anxiety, the height of stress, the fear of the future, the fear of being able to make it financially, educationally, institutionally, but the ability to make it, the feeling of having the odds against you. All of our peers are battling these issues and confronting these emotions, these thoughts, and these physical realities. So we hold everything in a very delicate embrace, not trying to overly control and overly correct whatever the future is going to become and make it what we want it to be, and not overly controlling and overly correcting that which is our most innate fears and hesitations, but instead holding them both very lightly in a light and loving embrace and trying to prepare ourselves for whatever the future will bring.
Religion writer and thinker Phyllis Tickle, the late Phyllis Tickle, she talked about how um, the history of religion is that about every 500 years, um, the Christian church would go through what she would call a rummage sale, where there would be a letting go of certain things that it no longer needed,
Mm.
but then also recognizing what still mattered. I guess maybe in today's context, we would say there was every 500 years there was a Marie Kondo reorganizing of the church, where you figured out what sparked joy and what didn't, and so you had Jesus reforming religion 2,000 years ago. Then you had the Great Persecution at 500 AD, the Great Schism at 1,000 AD. You had the Great Reformation at 1500, and now we're in 2000. And she suggested back around 2000 that we would be going through another type of purging of what we needed to get rid of, and holding on to some things ancient and embracing some things new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what is happening right now. And it's so, like you said, Shane, it's a time to hold things loosely, and things will become clear what we need to carry forward with us, and what we don't need to carry forward with us. And then I also think about the role of John the Baptist, and think about the role of people like you and I, Shane, who are part of the dying institution, and saying that, we could be, if we would embrace it this way, we can be the John the Baptist role. We can be the ones that prepare the way for the next one, while at the same time saying our role is to ultimately decrease, so that the new revelation of God, the new experience of God's salvation, the new experience of God's people can increase. And so our job is where we can slowly step things out of the way that need to be stepped out of the way. So, like you said, Jonathan, where people of color and women and LGBTQ people can step into leadership roles, and where new ideas and new ways of doing church can move forward. I think that is where those of us who are in Christian leadership right now, that's what we can do, and consider it a privilege, and not bemoan the fact that we're part of a dying institution, but recognize that we get to be active and moving at what is actually a vibrant, and will be looked back on as a very vibrant, dynamic time in the church's history.
Mm. Amen.
Yeah, I was just going to add, after listening to both you, Shane, and you, Todd, I was going to say as a it's funny, have you guys heard the term the Oregon Trail generation? Apparently that's what they call my generation, where we're kind of between Gen X and millennial, where we're kind of the bridging generation between Gen X and millennial. We were talking about Oregon earlier, so that's what made it come to mind, because that was the computer game that we all played in school when I was a kid. But I guess, as someone who is, I'm a seminary grad, I'm in ministry, I'm still in the ordination process, which has been interminable. I mean, it's been like 6 years now. Good Lord. But I think what I've realized is what I've always told my discernment committees is I am a pastor. I am called to be a pastor.
Right.
And I know that God is going to use me wherever I am, whether I'm ordained or not, and that people actually see me as a pastor, even though I don't have those credentials yet.
Right.
So, but what I would say to you, who are my older brothers in the faith, is that I think that there are a lot of young folks like myself and younger, who I think are looking to be mentored, and who are looking to be shepherded, and who are looking to learn the ropes, so to speak. Maybe not in terms of how to run a church, but in terms of how to follow Jesus, and in terms of what it looks like to be a shepherd, and what it looks like to serve in humility and fear and trembling, before a holy God, and before our brothers and sisters in this world who we are called to love and serve and lay down our lives for. Just what it looks like to be a minister, and what it looks like to be a pastor, and what it means to live out our values. And so I think that there is a role for sure for you guys refer to yourselves as like the relics of or like a dying breed. It's like, hey, get out of the museum. You're not in the museum yet. Like, like,
no, we're living relics. We're living relics.
Okay. So you're not in the museum yet. So I would say, please, pour into us. Look for those opportunities to take us out to lunch, take us out to breakfast, to look for those opportunities to pour into the next generation, and to pour into those leaders that God is raising up to be a part of whatever the church is becoming in the 21st century.
Well, I think that's a great encouragement and a great challenge both. And thank you for that. My question, which is sort of a question I repeat from time to time on this podcast, is how then do we go about making the connectivity? How do we go about building the relationships that you're describing? So this is not a question to be answered today. It's a question to continue to be thought about and mulled over. But particularly as we're coming out of COVID and we have all of this, technological experience under our belts, how do we take this kind of technology and in-person opportunities as well? But how do we connect with one another, like you're indicating and like you're describing? So I would like for us to also hold that in front of us as well. How do we make these connectivities and these connections, and how do we make them meaningful for one another? This coming Sunday, Father's Day, I will be here 4 years. And so I started 4 years ago on Father's Day Sunday, having been elected previously back in that April. And I'm in a 117-year-old congregation as of July. Will be 117 years old on the same piece of property for the entire time. And in a congregation that was founded before the city of Glendale was ever chartered. And so we're older than the city of Glendale itself, and have been on this prime corner for all of these generations, and probably one of Southern California's first mega churches when you look at attendance and things of that nature, and then going through historic decades of decline, and that decline continuing even to this hour. So I say to you, by way of testimony in relationship to what Todd shared earlier, my vision and view of who I am and why I'm here has changed a lot in the last 4 years since my arrival. And I am completely convinced, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that my role and function here now as I know it, having looked back over the last 4 years, is to make the way ready for those who will come after me, to prepare the way, to till the soil, dig up the stumps, remove the boulders, make the ground not only tillable, but make it productive, make it to where the seed can fall and be planted, and to do the heavy lifting necessary so that those who come after me, who will be younger than I, who will be more gifted than I, who will be more intelligent than I, will have an opportunity to really express themselves and spread their wings and do in ministry and mission what needs to be done in order for Glendale to have a gospel presence on this corner for another season of generations.
Thanks for listening. We'd love to get your feedback on today's conversation. Please email us at uncollaredpodcast@gmail.com. You can find Uncollared wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can watch the podcast on YouTube. And please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.